Good evening, and welcome to the Autism Blogcast. I'm Jim Mancini.
And I'm Raphe Bernier.
This month, we sent our roving reporters to Baltimore, Maryland for IMFAR, the International Meeting for Autism Research.
IMFAR is an annual meeting that brings together autism researchers from around the world to get together and discuss the latest in scientific findings, all focused on autism. This year, scientific studies will be presented focusing on the etiology of autism, really with lots of studies focusing on environmental and genetic risk factors for autism, as well as some of the new interventions that are being worked on right now.
On the clinical side, there was a focus on underserved populations and autism through the lifespan.
We hope you enjoy our on-the-scene coverage, and we'll see you next month.
Jim Mancini here. An important part of IMFAR are the poster presentations. This is an opportunity for scientists to present their research and for attendees to be able to walk around and ask specific questions. We're here in the poster session for IMFAR, and we're going to speak to Dr. Mendy Minjarez. Dr. Minjarez, would you mind telling us about your science?
So this poster is about parent education, and essentially what it looks at is how we are measuring outcomes from parent education interventions. So previously, intervention that is geared towards parents has not looked very carefully at whether the parents learned what we're trying to teach them, which obviously in parent education interventions is a very important thing to measure. So this poster talks about some new ways of measuring whether the parents learned what we're trying to teach them and whether that actually had an effect on the child's improvement in language skills.
Okay, very interesting work in treatment.
Raphe Bernier reporting live from IMFAR in Baltimore, Maryland. We've just completed a panel symposium led by Dr. James McPartland from Yale University. Dr. McPartland, tell us a little bit about your panel.
Sure, Raphe. So the panel was about biomarkers, which are really just objective ways of measuring things that are important to understand for treating autism. And what we were looking at is how they vary among different kinds of psychiatric disorders. Because the things that we think are germane to autism might be telling us something specific about autism, or they might be just telling us something that a brain isn't working in the way we would expect. So all of the presentations were looking at biomarkers that were relevant to autism and schizophrenia. And it was really promising. What we see is actually it's less important to think about these people in groups and more useful to think about these biomarkers as telling us something about the way the brain works and how that impacts functioning irrespective of a diagnostic category.
Okay, Jim Mancini here at IMFAR. One of the most interesting topics to come out of this year's conference is the role of folic acid in autism. So we were lucky enough to grab Dr. Raphael Bernier, who's going to tell us a little bit more about this news.
Yeah, well, hello, Jim. Yeah, one of the things that has emerged this IMFAR is that the role that folic acid may play in autism is complicated. So for a long time we've known that we need to take folic acid to make sure that we're maintaining appropriate health for the baby. That is, mothers should be taking folic acid, and that can help stave off a variety of birth challenges and birth defects. But what some of the research here is suggesting that actually too much folic acid might in fact increase the risk of autism. Now this has caused quite a stir in the media around the country right now because these are preliminary findings. They have not been peer reviewed yet. So we're not going to make too much of it. It's just something we want to be paying attention to. The message here from IMFAR in this meeting is that while we want to make sure we're taking folic acid during pregnancy, too much could be a risk factor. But this is early news, and we don't want to jump to any conclusions. That's the take home. Good morning. Raphe Bernier here live at IMFAR. We just finished up our final keynote speech of our meeting here with Paul Shattuck, and now we've got a chance to chat with Dr. Gary Stobbe from Seattle Children's Hospital. Give us a few words on today's keynote.
Well, I think there are some really important messages that Dr. Shattuck portrayed. The importance of collecting data. So the theme of his talk was moving the needle, and this concept that we don't have gauges right now that are in existence. We don't have measurements. We're spending a lot of money on research, but we're not really looking at what are the outcomes. Is this money being spent being wasted, or is it a true investment in the future of autistics and helping them and their families? So this is a really important message that we as a scientific community need to look at how are we spending this money? And if we're not measuring adult outcomes, there's a concern that this money is not being well spent. So it was a great message. I think there was also a message that we don't have right now a lot of outcome data. There's not a lot going on, and there needs to be a definite movement towards pooling data and really looking at outcomes and working with the autistic community on what are the best outcomes to measure. Don't just assume that we know what those might be. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, thanks, Gary. That wraps up our coverage of the 2016 IMFAR convention. We'll see you back in Seattle.